Hi there, it's Sandra from the Schwowin's Nest. Thanks so much for joining me today. I've decided to flip this spool. It held some electrical wire and the wire was done, so I grabbed it. This was hanging around at my cottage, and so it was absolutely free. So who doesn't like free? I'm also going to be using some Dollar Tree supplies. I'm going to use 3 of their cookie sheets. I thought I might use these styrofoam circles, but I didn't end up using them in the end. You're also going to need something that has a fairly wide surface. I'm using the bottom end of this Dollar Tree craft scraper, and you can see what I'm doing is just rubbing it along the cookie sheet to get rid of all those little bumps. You can also use the end of the scissors. You can use a scraper if you have something like a plastic scraper, that would probably work too. A spatula, a spoon, anything that will give you that smooth surface. And using hot glue, remember when you're using hot glue on metal, it gets super hot. These cookie sheets warm up really quickly as well. So what you're going to do is use something else. I'm just using the end of this scraper because it is silicone, and that's just going to help me protect my fingers. I'll do the same thing on the bottom, and then when I take the second piece, I'm going to overlap them just a little bit. Because it's in a circle, I'm not going to be able to do them 100% straight, so I do want them to overlap so they get this type of shape. It's going to be so cute when it's finished. I've just got one more piece to glue on. Take a look at this. It is absolutely so adorable. I was so pleased with how it was turning out. So excited that my vision was actually working out. Sometimes as crafters, these things don't always work out. So it's actually I'm going to use the rim of the cookie sheet and fold it over onto itself on an angle so it gets bigger as I go. Then I'm going to glue the 2 ends together and then hot glue it on top of the pumpkin, and that will create a beautiful stem. Using another piece of the edge, I'm just going to press it flat and then cut a couple of pieces that I'm going to be able to use as the little twirly vine pieces at the top of the pumpkin stem. I'm just going to use my screwdriver and wind it around the handle to make a nice big fat curly Q for my pumpkin stem. The original spool had some rusty black kind of markings on it. They were kind of dots, or it looked like someone had spray painted it. It's just how it oxidized, I guess. So what I'm doing is just taking some hammered metal finish paint in black, and I'm just spraying a little bit on there to get the same type of look that the spool got. So just some little spritzes, not too much color on this, but I just want to kind of dull it down a wee bit. Once the spray paint was dry, I took my honey brown acrylic paint and a really stiff brush, and I'm going to just flick some of this paint onto the pumpkin. I want this to look like kind of rusty spots, or I liked how it looked with the black, but I wanted it to have a little bit more of some fall pumpkin color to it as well. Here's how the pumpkin looks now that it's all finished. Let me know what you think. My first project for you today is using these Dollar Tree Farm Fresh pumpkin signs. Now these were the design from last year, but I believe the pumpkin shape is still available this year. It just has a new design on the front of it. I'm going to just disassemble it by taking the leaf off and that jute string because I'm not going to need that. I've got 6 of these. I only ended up using 5, but I just wanted to make sure that I had enough. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is scoring with my box cutter and my ruler, and I'm going to be removing that stem because I don't need that. This is like a multi-density fiber board, almost just like a really thick cardboard. And when you score it with your box cutter, you can just snap off the piece very easily. Next, I'm going to do the same thing with my box cutter, but I'm going to score it in half. So I want to have each of these pumpkins cut in half. I'm going to find the middle, then cut my first piece, and then use one of the halves as a template to cut the rest of the pieces. Once you've got it cut in half, you can just easily clean up any of the pieces that are still there just using the knife again. I'm now going to use some of this crack shot spackle and just fill in those holes that were used to hang these signs. They could probably be filled in with paint, but I just wanted to make sure that they were nice and solidly filled before I started to paint. Once the spackle's dry, I'm just taking a really fine 220 grit sandpaper and just sanding it nice and smooth. This is a tube from a roll of gift wrap. I've cut it in half, and now I'm using Rust-Oleum chalked paint in the color Chiffon Cream, and I'm going to give this a couple of coats, but just 3/4 of the way. I'm going to leave that top section brown for now. I'm also going to give all of these pumpkin halves a couple coats of the Chiffon Cream. On this front side where that black label is, I needed to do 2 coats. For the brown on the back, 1 coat was sufficient. Now I'm going to distress with a color that's very similar to the Waverly Mineral Chalk paint. This one is called Mushroom, and it's just a latex paint that I had left over from painting my walls. So I love the color and I use it quite a bit. I'm just going to do a dry brush technique because I just want to accentuate some of the brush strokes that were made when I painted it with the Chiffon Cream. I gave the top part of the roll a little bit of dark brown paint, and now I'm just going to dry brush it with the mineral color too. I'm using hot glue to attach the pumpkin slices to the roll. You've got to use a lot of hot glue and you've got to hang on to it a long time for it to set up. Otherwise, it's just going to fall off. So I put a bead of glue down where the slice of the pumpkin is going to meet the roll. Then I also add some more hot glue on either side of the slice. And then I just use my finger with my little silicone pad on there and smooth out the hot glue so it doesn't look too chunky. I'm now going to use a makeup sponge and some acrylic paint in the color Honey Brown. It's a really kind of a muted brownish orange color. It's really nice, and I love it for farmhouse decor because it's really not too bright of an orange. And I'm just going to dab my makeup sponge all the way around on all of these edges, and if a little bit of paint gets on the Chiffon Cream, that's okay. It's going to just give it some little bit of added character and make it look a little bit more like a pumpkin. So as you can tell from this, the brown is meant to be the stem of the pumpkin, but I didn't want it straight up like that. It just didn't look natural. So I'm taking my box cutter and making 4 slits about a 1/2 inch down, and then I'm just going to bend those cardboard pieces in on themselves just to give it more of a stem look, a little bit more natural looking, I guess. I also cut a bit of a slit about halfway down because I wanted to give the stem a little bit of a crook. So taking out a little piece of the cardboard allowed me to just bend it without breaking anything. I decided to take some hot glue and glue down the stem pieces just so they would be in the shape that I wanted. I didn't like them kind of just all ragged like that, so I'm just going to bend them over and glue them in place. No farmhouse project would be complete without some type of twine or jute rope or burlap. So I've got this wired cord from the Dollar Tree. It's jute rope or twine, but it's got a wire inside of it. So I'm just going to be twirling it around my pencil so I can get the curly cues of the pumpkin, and then I'm going to wrap the center portion around the bottom of the stem. I'm going to go around 3 or 4 times, and I'll secure it with hot glue so it doesn't pop off. I'm going to use one of these burlap oak leaves from the Dollar Tree. They come in a pack of 5, and I'll just hot glue that right onto the stem. I am so happy with how this turned out. Check out this adorable pumpkin. Today I am working with these 3 wooden pumpkins that I picked up at Dollarama. They were $1.50 each. They're really nice and thick and they stand up on their own, but unfortunately they are covered with glitter. I'm using my Dollar Tree scraper and just peeling off the label on the top. Then I'm going to give them all a quick sanding just to smooth down the surface. I'm using white DIY chalk paint to paint the front, the back, and the sides. If you're interested in that recipe, it's down in my description box. While I wait for the pumpkins to dry, I've got these 2 pieces of scrap wood that I'm going to glue together with a product called No More Nails. It's from LePage. You can get it in a tube like this, or you can get it in a caulking gun style, and it's basically the toughest glue you can ever find. It does what it says. You don't need nails for this. This will hold it together. However, I do clamp things down when I'm using this product. So I'm just going to spread out the glue at the bottom. I will then spread it out a little bit more so it's more evenly spaced all over the wood, and then I'm going to clamp the 2 pieces together and let it fully dry. I'm using Folk Art chalk paint in the color Maui Sand. It's a beautiful deep gray color and I just love it. Look how thick that paint is. It really covers nicely. Most of the time I can get everything covered in one coat. So I'll definitely be checking out more folk art colors in the future. I'm using a small artist brush and I'm going to paint the stem, but I'm also going to just do a really jagged edge down where the stem meets the pumpkin just to make it look more realistic. I'm going to start creating some little arcs in the pumpkin to mimic the grooves that you see in the pumpkins. Try and make it a little bit more 3-dimensional looking. Using the same brush, without dipping it into the paint again, I'm just dry brushing around the edges to make the lines look more blended. Once I had completed this step on all the pumpkins, I thought that the gray was a little too dark. So I'm just taking a little bit of white paint and going over it, blending it in a little bit more. To give these pumpkins a little bit more dimension and make them look even more 3D, I'm using this chippy brush and the same gray paint, and I'm going in the direction of the pumpkin shapes. This is just going to help it look a little bit more realistic. After they were distressed, I still found that those gray lines were a little bit too bright. So I'm taking another color, it's sort of a taupe color, and I'm going over the lines and blending them out even more. And you can see that it just is making such a difference. I'm also going to be using this brush and color just to dry brush a little bit more color onto the rest of the pumpkin as well. I use the same color to dry brush the stems. I've got 3 of these pumpkins, so I've decided to write the words grateful, thankful, and blessed. And I'm going to start by penciling the lines in. I don't ever start at the beginning of the word. I tend to start at the end of the word and work my way backwards. I'm not really sure why. It just is a system that I figured out and it works for me. I'm using my all-time favorite paint pen. This is black Craft Smart oil-based paint pen in a chisel tip. I'm just going to go through my letters, write them all down, and then I'm going to come back and fill in the spaces where I want them to be thicker. If you're not comfortable doing freehand lettering, there's lots of other ways that you could get the letters on your projects. First of all, you could find some stickers and stick them on. Secondly, I like to use stencils a lot of the time, but I don't have any stencils that have this type of font style, so that's why you see me doing this freehand. You can also print the word off from your computer and then trace it onto your projects. Lately, I have been adding some little shadow lines to all of my words. And the reason I'm doing this is because a lot of the Farmhouse fonts and stencils have extra shadowing letters on them. It just makes them look a little bit more high end and more professional. This isn't a special marker, it just happens to be a black fine tip marker that I have, and it works great. I'm just taking a little dry brush that's a sort of a fan shape, dipping it into that taupey gray color and just doing a little bit of dry brushing on top of the letters to make them look not so brand new. With this next step, I totally forgot to turn my camera on, but it's pretty simple. I have this little buffalo check ribbon from Walmart and I cut a piece off and hot glued it around the stem. I'm going to add a little bit of greenery to the pumpkins. This is sort of a lamb's ear look, but it's a boxwood leaf. And I'm just going to trim the little stem and then hot glue it onto the pumpkin. Then I grabbed another little piece of the buffalo check ribbon and cut it in a dovetail shape at one end and then hot glued it onto each of the pumpkins just to give it a little bit more of a cute look. I really love the black and white buffalo check. I normally don't do bows and ribbons, but I think it really fits in this piece. So it's been a couple hours and the base is completely dry. So what I'm going to do now is use hot glue and just pop those pumpkins right on top. And I'm going to put 2 at the bottom, right on the edge, and I'm going to put 1 on the top layer. Now I'm going to add a little bit more greenery. I've got some little pine cones from the Dollar Tree that I'm going to add in. And I also have another little green pumpkin that I'm going to play around with and stick him on as well. I have to say that I think this is one of my favorite projects that I've done this season. Look at how cute that is. So I'm going to start out with these little jack-o'-lanterns that came from Crafter's Square at the Dollar Tree. There's 5 in a pack. These little orange ones I picked up at Dollarama. They're little thank you cards, but I don't end up using them for this craft. I'm also taking some little squares of really thin cardboard. You'll see later on that I'm working with 2 pieces of cardboard for each pumpkin. You actually only need the 1. I did have an idea in my head of what I was going to do with these little pumpkins, but then realized I had a previous idea that I liked better, so I really only needed to glue on 1 piece of the cardboard. Here's where I glued on both pieces of cardboard, which wasn't necessary, but I am going to show you that anyway because that's how they turned out. So I'm gluing them just with some hot glue, 1 on the back and 1 on the front, basically just covering up that jack-o'-lantern face. Here's what I wanted to do originally. I'm taking a Dollar Tree buffalo check bag and I'm going to cut out pumpkin shapes and glue them on one side of the pumpkins. I've cut out 3 pumpkin shapes, and what I'm going to do with the back of those shapes is paint them with just some white latex paint, and then the buffalo check will go on the front. The other 2 pumpkins will get both sides painted with white. The 3 buffalo plaid pumpkins are now glued on to the wood pumpkins, and because this buffalo plaid plastic is really bright and shiny, I'm going to take my matte Mod Podge and give it 1 coat just to dull the shine down just a little bit. It actually works out really well. For the 2 white pumpkins, I'm going to dry brush some black onto them, give them more of a rustic look, and then I'm also going to use a fine artist's brush and just put in some of the grooves to make it look more like a pumpkin. Next, I'm using some jute twine all around the edges of the pumpkin. I want to cover up the cardboard and the wood and just make it look more finished and high end. I'm just using hot glue and placing the twine and gluing it in a few spots all the way around just to make sure it's secure. Now I'm going to assemble the garland, and what I've done is taking 4 strands of jute twine, and I think they're probably about 4 to 4.5 feet long. I tied a knot at both ends, and this is what I'm going to use to glue on to the back of my pumpkins. I wanted the jute twine to look a little bit thicker, but I didn't want to use jute rope because I thought it would be just too much. Here's my little pink silicone fingertip from the Dollar Tree, really handy when it comes to wanting to glue little things like this, especially fabric and sometimes plastic and paper gets really hot with hot glue. I'm going to continue gluing the rope to the back of the pumpkins, leaving about 5 to 6 inches of rope in between. I looked at the garland and I felt it needed a little bit something in between. So I have these little acorns that I collected from my front yard. I have a beautiful oak tree, and sometimes the squirrels will leave me a few acorns, but most of the time they eat them all up, so I can't actually harvest any. But I've got some, so I'm going to add a couple of them in between the pumpkins, just right on the jute twine. I also wanted to embellish a little bit more with a buffalo plaid shopping bag. So I'm cutting about a 1.25 inch strip. I'm just taking 2 of the little squares, and I'm going to cut a long strip, and I'm going to create some little ribbons or dovetailed little pieces for the banner. I'm not quite sure what you would call what I'm making, but I think they would be like the tails of a ribbon. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut some pieces, and then I'll show you how I put them together. I'm not sure if all of you would make these this way, but this is the easiest way that I figured out to make them. I've got 2 8-inch strips here. 1 8-inch strip will be enough for one of the tails. I'm cutting a V into the ends of them so they have that dovetailed look. And then I'm going to take one of the strips, find the center, and then twist it just so it comes around twice. So basically I'm going to twist once, twist twice, and there I've got both of the colors showing up really nicely there. And that's what I'm going to glue onto the acorn area of the garland. For project number 2, I picked up 2 of these little topiary pumpkins from my Dollarama store. They were only $4. They're ceramic, they're really high quality, and I just love them. The one thing I don't love about them is the orange color. I'm doing more neutral colors in my fall decor, more of a farmhouse style, so I decided to give these a couple of coats of white chalk paint. I'm also going to fill in the lettering that's on here because it's grooved fairly thick. But what's going to happen is you're still going to be able to see the words. So I'll probably use these for Thanksgiving as well as just for fall decor. The white is dry. I've got a couple coats on here, and now I'm just taking some black paint and I'm going to just paint the undersides of these leaves anywhere where I got some white paint on them. I'm also going to do a little dry brushing on the top of the leaves. I don't mind the green, but there's a little bit of orange in there, so I just want to give it a little bit more depth and color. The last project. I hope you enjoyed these pumpkin DIYs and are getting some fall inspiration. If you haven't done so yet, I'd love for you to click that subscribe button and stick around a while. The black arrow will tell you exactly where to click. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your support. See you in the next one.